Welcome to Crime Podcastle Mystery Series, Episode 21. Today, we're diving deep into a life that sounds like it's straight out of a movie. The story of Phoolan Devi, India's Bandit Queen.
It's one of those stories that just grabs you and won't let go.
Oh yeah, from the moment she appears on the scene, it's clear Phoolan Devi was someone you don't mess with. But her story's not just about crime. There's resilience, social divides, and an unsolved murder that people are still trying to figure out.
You've got it. And to really grasp her life, we got to dig into some of India's deepest social issues.
Okay, so let's break this down. Phoolan Devi was born in 1963 in a small village in Uttar Pradesh. And from what I've read, her early life was incredibly rough. I mean, we're talking about extreme poverty discrimination because she was a lower caste girl and even forced into marriage when she was only 11.
Yeah, and that experience as a lower caste girl, that's key to understanding her story. India's caste system, it's a really complicated and ancient social hierarchy that sadly dictates a person's chances in life from the moment they're born. Being lower caste meant she was denied basic rights and opportunities right from the start.
So it goes beyond just being poor. It's like being stuck in a system that boxes you in and keeps the powerful in power.
Exactly, and for Phoolan, this systemic disadvantage kind of pushed her toward a life she might never have chosen otherwise.
Almost like she was destined for hardship from the very beginning. And if I'm understanding this right, her forced marriage only made things worse.
Absolutely. Child marriage was and sadly still is a problem for many girls in India, especially those from lower castes. It takes away their childhood and often leads to abuse and exploitation.
It's just heartbreaking to even think about. But Phoolan, being as strong-willed as she was, actually managed to escape this marriage and went back to her village. But things didn't get any easier for her there, did they?
No, going back didn't bring her the safety or opportunity she might have hoped for. The exploitation and violence continued. And it's at this point that her life takes a really dramatic turn.
This is when she runs off to the Chambal Ravines, right? An area known for being a hideout for dacoits, essentially gangs of bandits.
Exactly. The Chambal Ravines were kind of lawless territory, where people who felt pushed aside by society like Phoolan found refuge and created their own power structures.
And in this world, Phoolan joins a dacoit gang. It's a risky path, but it's also where she starts building her reputation.
Her time as a dacoit is complicated. There are acts of brutality, but also moments where she seemed to stand up for those being oppressed. This kind of duality makes her story so interesting.
And then comes the event that puts her in the national spotlight, the Bamai Massacre in 1981.
This was a turning point for Phoolan. It was an act of revenge that shocked the nation and solidified her image as both a ruthless criminal and a folk hero.
To really understand the impact of Bamai, I think we need to break down what exactly happened.
I agree. Phoolan, seeking revenge for the humiliation and violence she'd suffered, led an attack on the village of Bamai, where she had been wronged. The massacre resulted in the deaths of 22 men from the village.
22? That's a lot of people. I can only imagine how India must have reacted at the time.
It was huge news and led to this massive manhunt for Phoolan. She was public enemy number one.
It's like she became this larger-than-life figure, symbolizing both terror and defiance all at once.
That's a good way to put it. To the authorities, she was a dangerous criminal who had to be brought to justice. But for some marginalized communities, she became a symbol of resistance against the caste system and the exploitation they faced.
It's amazing how one event can be seen so differently depending on who you ask. So what happens next in Phoolan's story?
Well, after being on the run for 2 years, Phoolan ends up making a really dramatic decision. In 1983, she negotiates her surrender to the authorities, and it's this big public spectacle. It was a carefully orchestrated event that captured the nation's attention.
I'm picturing a huge crowd, cameras flashing, and Phoolan Devi right in the middle of it all.
You got it, pretty much. The terms of her surrender were unique. She agreed to give up her weapons in exchange for certain conditions, including a limited prison sentence.
So she kind of outsmarted the system in a way.
You could definitely say that. She knew how to use her notoriety and public image to her advantage. And that savvy maneuvering would come into play again later in her life.
Wait, you're telling me there's even more to this story? I can't wait to hear what happens next.
Trust me, you won't be disappointed.
Okay, so Phoolan Devi surrenders, but she makes sure she gets specific terms for her time in prison. Where does this all lead?
Well, she spends 11 years behind bars, and during that time, she actually learns to read and write.
Hold on, she couldn't read or write before going to prison. That makes her rise to power even more incredible.
It really does. It shows how smart and adaptable she was. Even while locked up, she was learning and growing, getting ready for what came next.
And what a next chapter it was. She's released in '94 and jumps right into politics.
Yeah.
Talk about a twist.
Right. It was unexpected, but it makes sense when you think about her charisma, her ability to connect with those marginalized communities, and her understanding of how power works.
So she wasn't content with just fading away after prison.
Not a chance. She joined the Samajwadi Party, which fought for the rights of lower caste communities, and she was elected to parliament representing the Mirzapur constituency.
Wow, from bandit to politician. That's an incredible transformation.
It is, and it shows the complicated and often contradictory nature of Phoolan Devi's life. She was a woman who just defied easy labels, someone who challenged social norms and expectations every step of the way.
But her time in politics was tragically cut short by her assassination in 2001.
Exactly. On July 25th of that year, she was shot and killed outside her home in Delhi. A voice that had become increasingly powerful and influential was silenced.
And that's where the real mystery starts, right?
Hmm?
Who wanted her dead and why? It feels like there are way more questions than answers when it comes to her murder.
Absolutely. A man named Sher Singh Rana confessed to the killing. He said it was revenge for the Bemai massacre. But a lot of people think there's got to be more to it.
Okay, let's dig into those theories. Because on the surface, Rana's confession seems pretty straightforward. But like you said, there's this feeling that something's not quite right.
The timing is one of the biggest things that makes you wonder. Here's Phoolan Devi almost 20 years after Bemai. Now a member of parliament working within the very system she once rebelled against. Why would someone wait that long to get revenge? Especially when she was probably more vulnerable during her time as a dacoit.
That's a good point. Makes you think if Rana was maybe a pawn working for someone else. Someone who saw Phoolan Devi as a threat for totally different reasons.
That's a very real possibility. Think about her growing influence in politics. She was this strong voice for the lower castes, challenging the way things were and demanding social justice. It's easy to imagine her political rise making some powerful people really uncomfortable.
Especially those who benefited from the existing power structures and social hierarchies.
Exactly. She was shaking things up, and that can create dangerous enemies. Especially in a system where caste and social standing have historically held so much power.
But we can't forget about Phoolan Devi's past. She was a dacoit for years, a world known for violence and complex loyalties. It's possible she made enemies back then who were just waiting for the right moment to strike.
Definitely the underworld connections are important. It adds another layer of complexity to an already complicated case.
So we have these three main threads: revenge, political rivalry, and underworld connections. It's like trying to put together a puzzle where each piece could fit in multiple places.
And that's what makes this case so interesting. The lack of clear answers, the lingering questions, and having to deal with the messy realities of power, revenge, and social change.
It also makes you think about the price of going against the system, especially in a society as divided as India.
Phoolan Devi's life really embodies that struggle. She went from being extremely disadvantaged to becoming a symbol of resistance and change. But her journey was cut short. Her assassination could be seen as the tragic outcome of daring to disrupt those in power.
A reminder of the dangers faced by those who challenge the status quo, especially those from marginalized backgrounds.
It raises questions about whether the justice system can really protect such individuals.
But aside from the theories and speculation, what do you think is Phoolan Devi's lasting legacy?
That's a tough one. And I think the answer depends on who you ask. To her supporters, she's still a hero, a symbol of empowerment for lower caste communities. They remember her as a woman who fought injustice and refused to be defined by her circumstances.
And to others, she's more controversial, a figure tied to the violence of her past.
Yes, the Bemai massacre is still a big part of her story. A reminder that her path to empowerment involved both defiance and brutality.
A complicated legacy, for sure. But she definitely had an impact on Indian society, right?
Absolutely. She brought attention to the struggles of marginalized communities, challenged gender norms, and forced a conversation about the deep inequalities in the system.
And even decades after her death, her story still resonates.
It does. It's a story of resilience, resistance, and the ongoing fight for social justice in India. It's a story that makes us face uncomfortable truths and question the nature of power itself.
It's amazing how Phoolan Devi's story still gets people talking, even today. It's like she became something bigger than just her life.
Oh, she definitely became a cultural icon, both in India and around the world. Her story's been told in books, films, documentaries, even songs.
Speaking of films, anyone listening who wants to learn more about Phoolan Devi should check out the movie Bandit Queen.
It's a powerful look at her life, but it's good to remember that it does take some creative liberties.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
But it still captures her character, her struggles, and the energy of the world she lived in.
Yeah, and the film itself caused quite a stir when it came out.
Oh, why is that?
Well, it pushed the boundaries with how it showed violence, gender, and caste in Indian society. And that led to some controversy.
Seems kind of fitting, though, doesn't it? Even as a movie, Phoolan Devi's story keeps challenging norms and sparking debate, just like she did in real life.
Yeah, it shows how powerful her story really is. It forces us to face some uncomfortable truths about inequality and justice and how complex people can be.
So to wrap things up, I think it's safe to say that Phoolan Devi's life and death are still a mystery.
A mystery that keeps fascinating and challenging us.
We may never know for sure who was really behind her assassination or why they did it.
But we can keep exploring the questions, looking at different perspectives, and learning from the complexities of her story.
And that's what's so great about digging into history. It's not always about getting definite answers. It's about engaging with the past and using what we learned to understand the present better.
Well said.
And on that note, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and death of Phoolan Devi, India's Bandit Queen.
We hope you've got some things to think about after this episode.
If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe to CrimePod Castle Mystery Series. We have more fascinating and thought-provoking stories from history coming your way.
And don't forget to tell your friends and family about this episode, especially those who might be interested in Phoolan Devi's extraordinary life.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the mysteries of the past.